this is, I believe, where we left off. We were talking about subject matter, right? We were talking about the kind of questions our historians ask. And we had talked a little bit about two things that our historians begin to investigate. So remember what I talked about also the first day of class, how important it is to take notes. Don't rely on my recording, because if I walk away from this podium, the microphone stays right there. And if somebody asks me a question in class, it doesn't pick you up very well, right? So the whole point of recording is to give you something to review using your notes in case you miss something, but not to be the primary place for your engagement with the course material. Now, that said, we started off a week ago talking about the kinds of questions our historians ask. What are we going to be doing in this class? We're going to be looking at works of art from historical periods starting around 1300 to the present or so. We usually get to about World War II, which is pretty good. When I first started teaching this class, I was lucky to get to 1750. Anyway, we ask basic questions, and I think for every work of art that we look at, we're going to be talking about one of these things, if not all of them. So the first thing is iconography. Who wants to remember from their notes before, what does iconography mean? A $10 term. We talked about this last week, Monday, from your notes. Yeah, get it. Excellent. Subject matter. Very good. It also can be expanded to mean not only subject matter, but symbolism as well, right? So the subject matter can be thought of on multiple levels. A woman with a child on her lap. On one level, that's subject matter, right? In each one of these. Seated on a chair, right? A fairly elaborate chair. Or maybe even a throne, right? But as soon as you start to talk about it as a throne versus a chair, you're bringing some interpretation to what you're identifying, right? You're taking some of your experience and saying, that doesn't look like it's any old chair, right? That looks like something more than that. And for the Christians in the audience, you go a step further, and obviously the title helps this as well. That we can identify it as the Virgin Mary, or the Madonna, in Italian, My Lady, Madonna, right? The Virgin, My Lady, and the Christ child, Jesus, on her lap. So we can take the subject matter, the iconography, a step further and talk about it in more specificity with some historical knowledge. We can identify them as the Virgin Mary and Christ because of the halos, and because this type is so common. We see it again and again and again. And there are other parts of the iconography that repeat. For example, in the circles on either side of the Virgin's head on the earlier image on your left from the National Gallery. We have angels in Giotto's painting on the right, which follows the basic type. We have angels in the foreground instead, kneeling, right? Giotto has added other figures to it, these saints on either side, crowded around the throne. But if we ignore them for a second, we can see that the Madonna child and two angels is basically following a very similar type. The throne is more elaborate than Giotto's, more architectural, right? It goes over the top of her head. It provides her a space to sit in. But for the most part, the iconography is the same. Now, as we talk about iconography, we can also talk about symbolism, and it's sort of no accident that the two pictures of Christ are in fact incredibly similar. Both of them are blessing. The two fingers up like that is the pose that the priest holds when he blesses a congregation. Right? There's a Latin word, I don't care if you know it or not, pax vobis, peace be unto you. Right? So Christ performs the same action as a priest would perform. What's interesting is that Giotto's image on the right was made to be put behind an altar. So we call it an altar piece. So it's about 12 feet tall, and it was designed to sit directly behind the altar where the priest performs the Mass. And that means you would see a priest standing there doing the same thing Christ is doing at certain points in the service. There's a sort of parallelism, right? The one on the left may well have been for a smaller chapel. It's hard to say. It's about 2.5, 3 feet tall. But most likely for a public venue, and may well form the same service. So there's a certain symbolism to the gestures that we see in each of these as well. That's part of reading the iconography. Another part of reading the iconography is the scroll that Christ holds in his hand. Each one of these got a little roll of paper in his hand, right? And you see it's slightly unfurled in Giotto's image, the detail on the right, whereas it's rolled up tight in the anonymous Byzantine work on your left. This is probably a reference to the Book of Life, which in Catholic theological tradition is where all of the names of the saved are inscribed. It's the reference book, right, that Christ will refer to at the end of time when we get to the pearly gates, right? Who's made it, who hasn't. Okay? There's another alternative. There are often layers of symbolism. It's not always just one thing, right? So that's one possibility. Another possibility is that it's a reference to one of the first things that they say about Christ. In the book of John, the Gospel of St. John, it says, in the beginning was the Word. And Catholic theology, Christian theology in general, refers to Christ as the Word made flesh. So he's holding references to words, right? A sheet of paper, presumably with writing on it. Now, it's probably worn off here, but oftentimes when we get into tuck into details like this, we'll find writing in books, right? So there's a bit of a reference to that idea of Christ as the Word as well. There are multiple ways we can interpret it. So iconography is not just identifying the subject matter, but then beginning to analyze that subject matter. What does it mean? Why was it there? And what we proceed from in our history is the idea that no matter what, when, look what I'm missing out on. Nice details, right? That's not my picture on the right. You can see the picture on this. It looks like there's some words on there. And you can see here at the end of this one is my picture on the left. But you can see they've even drawn the end of the roll of paper there, right? That cigar he's holding. I lost my train of thought. I got distracted by the picture, which is probably a good thing. So we're really describing not only what is there, but what does it mean. And look, we proceed from the assumption that artists include elements in pictures for a very particular reason, not just because they wanted to. And this gives us a good example of that because the similarities between the arrangements of the two figures is so similar that you can't imagine that that's just because it was easier to do it that way. There's got to be some motivating factor behind it, right? And just like in a literature class where you proceed with the idea that when author decides to include a certain bit of descriptive detail, there's a reason for that. He wants you to know something about that character, or it's going to come into play later in the story, right? So things are there for a reason, and what we're trying to do is figure out why. How do they affect the way in which we interpret the picture? And this is the kind of the skill set that transcends our history. Because when we start to look at other images, you think about advertising, for example. The people who arrange photo shoots, right, will put things in there and arrange them in a particular way. Sometimes it's just aesthetic. You know, we like the sunset. But then sometimes they want the sunset to actually give you a feeling about something, right? Where you're looking at it, okay, why do I react to this the way I do? It's because of this amalgam of all these different things that wind up in that picture, right? So that's why I think, when I mentioned the first day class, why I think art history is such an important class, is that we're focusing on how do pictures communicate? How do they put things together to mean things, okay? So iconography is a huge part of that, right? And these two works then share that iconography. Even if you look at the placement of the Virgin's fingers coming across Christ's lap, the fingers sort of pointing between his knees, almost touching him on the inside of his thigh, much more obviously so in Giotto's, right? Here, just her hand, the one on my side here, sort of seems to hang in front of his body, right? There's no great sense of depth there. Everything looks like cutouts, South Park kind of, rather than, 3D modeling or anything like that. Whereas Giotto's got a really good sense of three-dimensionality, right? And so it looks almost like she's got him, and she's almost cradling him under his soft little thigh there, you know, helping to hold him on her lap. And then her other fingers coming around his waist here on his haunch. So when we talk about these things that artists choose to do, deliberately put into a picture, one of the other things are choices that artists make. And as anybody that's ever tried to learn to draw, you know that at a certain point you're trying to learn the rudiments of things. And sometimes some people seem to have a, you know, better hand-eye coordination than you do. But at a certain point it becomes obvious that certain artists are choosing particular ways of depicting things instead of certain other ways of depicting things. And in this case, in the 50 years or so between the Byzantine Madonna on the left and Giotto's Madonna on the right, things have changed, and Giotto is making particular stylistic choices. Not what he's depicting, but how he's depicting it. So instead of, here we're not talking about the fact that he added extra figures, but rather we're talking about things like, for example, how he models the drapery. You know what I mean by saying modeling the drapery? Making it look as if the light is falling across it, so you have highlights and shadows and the spaces in between. Right? In Giotto's picture, you have a whole range of tones if we look at the Virgin's robe. Now, the robe is probably darkened through time, the pigment. Blues are notorious for going black on us. Not always, but often. Right? If they're well preserved, they'll stay nice and lustrous like the one on the left. You have to imagine it was originally that color as well. But you can still see, if you look between her knees, that Giotto's kind of interested in how the drapery folds, and get a sense of, he knows how gravity works on the right, right? He knows how the folds go, and then as we look at the folds over here, you can see there's a highlight underneath here, and there's a highlight on the folds there, and there's that bit of fabric that comes down here, and it goes worn through the years, right? But there's a gentle modeling from a highlight here through a range of tones into the darkest darks in the shadows, right? Now, if you look at the one on the left, you'll notice that the highlights are just gold. And the darks are just blue, and there is no in between. The only in between is where those fingers of gold overlap the fingers of blue, right? Whereas Giotto has modulated everything, right? Worked it from light into shadow and back again. Right? It's much more artificial in the way it's handled, and makes it look really in the long run flat, even though there's quite a bit of gold dancing around the figure, right? It's not as realistically modeled. It doesn't appear as three-dimensional. And I think I'm way ahead of myself here, so we're going to talk ahead. We talked a bit about medium a week ago, didn't we? Right? This is the materials the artist is using. In this case, the materials are egg tempera. The colors that you see are pigment, that's the dry materials that make up the color, ground up stones, ground up plants, ground up other things like beetle bugs, right? Emulsified, stirred into some sort of agent that you can spread. And through the Middle Ages and into the early part of the Renaissance, the preferred emulsifying agent was egg yolk. Because like mayonnaise, it just makes this wonderful spreadable stuff, right? Only mayonnaise has lots of oil in it, and they weren't doing a lot of that yet, right? So it's mostly just the dry stuff mixed into egg yolk, and it dries opaque. And we'll see this effect in just a second. So the colors you see are egg tempera, which is the standard early Renaissance. We'll talk more about that term in a second. Early Renaissance medium. And in the background is all hammered gold. Hammered incredibly fine, incredibly thin, thinner than paper. Right? As thin as they could possibly hammer it so that it actually, just by static electricity, sticks to the surface of the wood. These are on wood panels. And they can manipulate the wood panel and the surface that's underneath the gold so that you get designs. And I think you can see some of that up here around the outside, that there is actually a pattern design as part of the background, right? That's part of the gold will be. So that's part of the stylistic choices that the artists are making. And this is very much the style around the year 1300 was to use gold leaf for most church artworks. Right? In addition to this, here's the chiaroscuro I was talking about, this light and dark patterning, where I said I was ahead of myself. The term we use for this is chiaroscuro. It's the Italian word light and dark. Chiaro, clarify, that's where we get that word, right? Clear, chiaro, scuro, obscure, darkness, right? Light and dark. And Giotto is applying a new way of rendering a three-dimensional form to look as if it's really three-dimensional by using a very elaborate chiaroscuro shading, right? And this is apparent everywhere. I just took two details I could compare. But look at the angel in the foreground, kneeling in front of the throne. Look at any of the figures there. Look at the faces of the figures. The only place you see anything like that is in the flesh bits of the Byzantine work. But in Giotto, it's everywhere, with the exception of the gold background, right? So these are stylistic choices that Giotto is making, right? Now I think we're finally ahead of us. One of the other things when we talk about stylistic choices is that Giotto, and he was praised for this by some relatively contemporary figures. Giotto goes a great way in trying to make the figures seem more lifelike, trying to make the figures seem more alive. And one way he does this quite a bit in his work, is you'll notice that you can see her teeth. She's breathing. And this goes back to a very, very old, actually Greek legend of Apelles, the great Greek painter to Alexander, whose paintings were so good that some people thought that the only thing that separated them from reality was the fact that they couldn't speak or couldn't breathe. And Giotto seems to make these figures that seem to be at the moment of breath, or even at the moment of speech, right? By seeing her mouth open and seeing her buck teeth there, right? No, the Madonna, she doesn't have buck teeth, but you see her front teeth there, right? Gives that sense that this is a speaking, living image. And that humanity, that lifelike nature, that realism, is a stylistic choice that Giotto is making that's very, very different from earlier work. And it's for this reason that many people say that Giotto is the father of the Renaissance. And we'll talk more about that term, is his ability to render these incredibly lifelike images. Okay? And this is true everywhere we look. The sense of three-dimensional space is so strong. You'll notice that he understands that those halos are sort of artificial, and he lets them obscure the figures behind them, because he wants to arrange the figures in a more natural way. Rather than sort of moving them out of the way so where you would see their entire profile, right? He doesn't mind crowding them together and letting the halos get in the way, because they become more naturally arranged, moving up into space. And I love the way that they sort of, this guy here, right? The way they sort of look in from the sides of the throne to grab a glimpse of the Virgin Mary as they look through, right? It's incredible. It looks like part of our space, right? And everywhere we look, we see this way in which it becomes part of it. Look at the throne down below, right? So the wings of the throne come out on either side. She's seated on a pillow on the throne. The other one was as well. And on the sides, we have these windows through, and it's sort of decorated with this inlay, probably stone or wood inlay on the back, and it kind of envelops it there. But then the throne does the second thing. It comes out toward her, right? So it steps out toward her, comes down, steps out again, and then comes down, and that's where the angels are kneeling. So what Giotto has done with the picture is to give you a really, to begin to give you this idea that when you look at the picture, you're looking at an extension of your space. talking about here? Right? So for example, right now, I could say, okay, let's look at this panel right here on the wall, right? And right now you're looking at a panel on a wall, right? It's a flat thing on a wall. But what Giotto is beginning to do is to create in that panel the sense that you're actually looking into something that's an extension of our space. How's my little perspective on this? Right? And now all of a sudden, instead of looking at that, I can fool myself within shape. I can fool myself into the fact that I'm looking down into the distance. Right? Looking out, and I put a little window on this wall, and I put mountains outside, like that, right? Okay, so now I'm not. So what happens here? On one level, you're still looking at this flat thing, but on the other level, you start to say, oh, that pushes my face for me. So here, we're not looking at a wooden panel anymore. Our mind starts to think we're not looking at a wooden panel anymore. And our mind starts to think instead that what we're seeing is our space extension, that the things that are there are part of where we are too. Rather than being in some schematic, semi-abstract other realm. Right? It's really a bold step in the direction of realism. Right? So, this is a huge stylistic change from where we just were. Right? If you look at stuff that happened before, it's really very flat. Even though there's some attempt to have the throne come out, it's all kind of wonky, If these arms that were shared here, in perspective, the arms are supposed to be further away from you. They're supposed to kind of converge, But they don't. They go the opposite direction. They flare out. And everything, you become really much more aware that you're looking at a flat piece of wood with some pigment on it here. Right? So why did Giotto do this? Why did we have this stylistic change? So this brings us down to the third major thing. I meant to animate this in. The third thing that our historians do, we talked so far, right? We talked about iconography, subject matter. The symbolism being part of that. Okay? Number two, we talk about style. Because that affects meaning as well. Okay? The third thing we talk about is we put both of those things in an historical context. That's what art history is versus art appreciation. Right? We're going to try to figure out why Giotto made these choices. What was going on around 1300 that would motivate Giotto or the people who paid him to want something that looked like the work of right versus the work of left. Okay? And oftentimes you can find things that correlate with that help to explain these choices, whether it's stylistic choices or even the inclusion of iconographic details. Right? In this case, it's the rise of a new religious thinking, particularly in Italy. And this was the religious thinking pointed by the mendicant orders. The term mendicant means begging. Right? Asking B-E-G-G, begging. Right? Please don't hesitate there. What did you just say? I got it in your face. If I did mendicant means begging. They ask for alms. Okay, there are orders of monks, monastic orders. Okay? Now, monastic orders we can trace back all the way to like the 4th century. Okay? In Egypt, 6th century in Western Europe. St. Benedict was early in the 6th century, right? But there are some Coptic earlier than that. The monastic ideal, why do people become them? Because they want to get away from all of the temptations of the world around them. They're going there, the city is offered all these things that got in the way of focusing on God. So most of the time they'll devote their entire life to God to a service by leaving that life behind, moving to the countryside, usually, establishing a confraternity, right, monastery, where they would live together, be self-sufficient, right, raise their own crops, husband their own animals, right? Raise own stock, et cetera, right? Be sort of independent from the evils of the world, right? The pleasures of the flesh. Right? And this is the ideal for the long term. Right? Well, in the 12th century, 1100s, we started to see major cities throughout Europe really become major centers of population. And as that happened, some of our holy people, saints, eventually saints, decided that it is all well and good to look after your own salvation, but we need to outreach to the people in these cities. We need to go back and tell them the stories that, how we found our own salvation. And so we began to see where monasteries being established in the cities to reach out to the people in the cities. The problem with that is you can't be self-sufficient. You can be walled off and everything, but you don't have the land you need to raise your own crops, to have your own cattle, right? Make your own mustard, whatever. Right? You don't have the room for that. So how do you subsist? And they ended up asking for alms. Right? Bathing orders, mendicant orders, as well. And the two major mendicant orders were the followers of St. Francis of Assisi, the Franciscans, and the followers of St. Dominic of St. Dominic, right? And each of them, these are both early 13th century, early 1200s, established monasteries in the city, not just the immediate followers, but it spread as a movement, okay? These are the mendicant orders, okay? Now, in addition to reaching out to the people in the city and seeing that as their principal duty in the world, the Dominicans were a bit, they took their name kind of seriously. If you take Dominican in Latin, you can translate it many times, the dog of God, Dominicanus, right? The God, they saw themselves as the protectors of Orthodox theology. Right? And they in fact wore black and white robes that and they saw themselves depicted often as Dalmatian dogs in pictures, right? Anyway, I'm getting off track. They were rivals, but not always angry at each other, kind of rivals, right? But they both felt that their job was to reach out to people. And so in addition to looking for the support that they needed for the monastery from the Christian people, right? In addition to that, they also felt that they needed to reach out to people and they needed to inspire them. And so there were two basic major parts that were new to their strategy. One, they would preach. They were preaching words. So they would go out to the street corner, right, and preach to the people. Not just within the churches, but in the public squares. Following the example of St. Francis, following the example of St. Francis. In addition to that, they would preach in a language people can understand. When you went to a church service in the 1200s, you heard the sermon in Latin. Now, Latin and Italian are pretty close to each other. But, that said, they preached in the vernacular, in the language of the people. And that meant in Italy and Italian. If they were in Venice, they would do the Venetian dialect. If they were up in France, they would do it in French. Right? They wanted to reach out to people in a language they could understand. They wanted to make sure that this message they were bringing was something that the people could take to heart and had no trouble in understanding. This brings us to the second part of their agenda, or outreach. And that was to take, in addition to the Bible, a number of other very popular biblical sources that had been around for about 150 years. Things like the Golden Legend by Chuck Norris. Various narrative accounts of things in the Bible or the saints' lives. And these narrative accounts often filled in those really great details the Bible tells us. What happened when Christ was born? How many people were there? How many shepherds actually showed up? What about what did Jericho midwife? Most did. these things that just aren't there. And they would use these to, and they have some of the text of some of the sermons. And they would elaborate on these details to make it so that when you heard about the virgin birth of Christ, or the passion that Christ died and he died in his mother's arms, and the emotion she felt on holding the dead body of her son, because it's just a what can we do like this? It's just a fun life, you know? And to respond to it in an empathic or sympathetic way, right? So it's just to reach out to you and say, this is like your life, right? Not only am I talking in the language you can understand, but I'm going to tell you details of the story that's going to make it click, and you can understand that as well, right? So if we go back to Galileo, we think about this in the back of our mind about what the Mendicants are doing, starting in the 1220s, 1230s. So it's new at the time of the picture on the left, and then it's half by Galileo. That idea of making biblical figures more realistic, more approachable, more similar to what you see in your world, is exactly what is happening religiously. And in fact, what John was doing with religious figures. He's making them part of your world. None of these figures are dressed looking like people looked in the first century. They're not historically accurate pictures. More often than not, when we get the images that show stories, we're going to see people dressed more like people dressed in the 15th century. It's just relevant to your life, right? So these are here with the message. They really are trying to come at you with something very important.
So they because of these type of arts to bring biblical stories to life. They did.
Yeah, I think this brings up an interesting question. Okay, so I'm talking about the mendicant orders, the Franciscans and the Dominicans. John is painting on the right, like I mentioned, about 12 feet tall, right? Massive thing, and it's in a church. It's not made for the Franciscans. It's made for other groups, but their influence is so wide, right? This is made for the Church of the Quincy Funds, right? I'll read it and then it's not the question. But at this point, right, it's made for other people because the impact of the Franciscans and the Dominicans, Franciscans in particular, was so widespread, right, that you started to see this same interest in groups other than the Franciscans. That just kind of works. Now, we do know from numerous historical texts that Giotto worked with the Franciscans on at least 6 different occasions, and that's just in the city of Florence, which is where it's from, right? And we have, at the National Gallery, a painting he did with the Franciscans, right? Does that answer your question? Is that where you're going with that?
We're trying to get how the orders itself relate to the art. So the orders are the promise regard state orders.
Good. Okay. So the word orders, I want to clarify two things. Because I hear the way you phrase the question, but this may not be a question you ask, I want to make sure. A monastic order is meaning monastic, right? So the Franciscan order versus the idea of ordering. I wanted to clarify that. So the Franciscan order has nothing to do with commission work, right? The Franciscan order is just a group of Franciscans. They're the order of monks, okay? And I'm sure there's other places in the career that I can think of other ways to use the word order in that way, right? Okay. Now, these groups had outlets all over Europe, right? Various cities. There weren't just one site. Although there is the Church of St. Francis in Assisi, right? That God actually worked at. There's a Presley, and other artists did too. So there is the sort of the mother church for the Franciscans, and then there were satellite churches in almost every town. And they too would commission works of art, or would order, right? They too would commission works of art. And this work of art was commissioned by a different church. But what it shows to us is the degree to which these ideas that had begun around 1220, 1230 had by the 14th century, the 1300s, had permeated almost everybody's interests, right? They affected everyone. Okay? So, this work by God was not commissioned by the Franciscans or the Dominicans, but shows the impact of their shift in the way people thought about religion from around 1250 to around 1300. Is that good? Is that what you were looking for? Good. Okay, let's get over here and see what's coming next. Now, we have the National Gallery in Giotto. Really a pretty terrific one as well. And it was probably commissioned by the Franciscans. It's a much smaller picture. It's only about like this, I would say. Right? So around there, it's maybe a little bit like half-life size or so. Right? A Madonna and Child, slightly later in his career. Very recently cleaned. When I first moved here 12 years ago, this was sort of this dark ruby. Cold still here. This is more of a dark ruby red, and this is sort of not as vibrant as a green, but they cleaned out some of the dirt, right, very recently, and got it up to snuff. And you can see how the gold leaf has been tooled, as you say, right? The background has been textured before the leaf has been laid on, so that when that very thin leaf is laid on, it covers that texture. And again, we have what Giotto's interest in is this wonderful image of the Madonna and Child that is really emphasizing in many ways the humanity of it all, right? Now, this window was commissioned by the Franciscans, and we'll go into that a bit more. But it definitely does show some nice details here. These typical things for Giotto. One thing you'll notice a lot with Giotto's pictures is that while they're somewhat more realistic, there's something about these almond-shaped eyes and sort of heavy Frankenstein brows that these figures have, right? They're really kind of like stern-looking figures, you know, and their eyes seem to be stretched out to the side of it. That's really typical for Giotto. But you can see this detail, not only the skin of her mouth, and you can see her teeth, and the fact that she's breathing, but you can also see the way in which this tempera paint you were talking about, the egg tempera, how it dries so big, and you can see the individual strokes almost like he's drawing with a lighter tone on the dark, because that's the way the paint comes. It builds up in a series of small patches. You can see it through here in her eyes and through here in her chin. And I might even have a closer detail than that to look at here. Yeah, there you can see the lines around her face. And again, that sense that she's about to speak and in the midst of breathing. And this is that realism that the Franciscans really liked. And it's even as strong here, if not stronger, than it is elsewhere. So, if we think about what we're talking about here, right, we're talking about iconography, subject matter, we're talking about style, and how we explain it in an historical context. Christ is again on her arms, he's bearing his weight. And how does Giotto try to make it a little bit more human? In addition to the fact that she's breathing, what else can you point to that makes it seem a little bit more human? Up front. James. That's just the cutest thing, right? He's got her finger. It's like, pull my finger. I always make that joke when I'm down at the National Gallery. You know a little joke on my finger? Well, anyway, Christ is not going to let me go. But yeah, he's hanging onto her finger. It's so charming, right? He's kind of balancing himself, and it's kind of like real baby stuff, you know? And he's just happy, even though he looks like a little man, doesn't he? He doesn't look like a baby. He looks like a pint-sized adult, right? Actually, I think all of his babies were kind of Bobby Hill. But, so you got that. Yeah, in the back. You had your hand up as well. Excellent. Yeah, totally true. And in fact, look at the realism of this. Christ's robe, right, only barely covers him up there. But you'll notice down by his feet, it's like diaphanous, isn't it? And if you look down below, you can see his little back ankle through that gauzy fabric with the gold hem. And you can see the pink of his leg go all the way up to his knee, right? And her fingers right over there, and it's really wrapped all the way around, just in front of his, where his genitalia would be, right? You have your hand back here as well. What else? That's right. In this case, he's doing something very different. So this will get us to this question of iconography, right? This is part of how do you read a picture. It's important to pay attention to the details. It's still a Madonna and Child, but there's many different things that you're doing here. So I'm going to go ahead a couple of slides so we can get there. There's the cute little fingers, right? The gold is again gold leaf laid on. Sometimes on the borders of these things, we can actually read words. We'll see that come up later. And you can also see, I think, very clearly on Christ how that sort of sketchy modeling that comes from the tempera paint that he's laying down, right? But even a fat little thumb on the other side of that finger as he's grabbed her. And then he's reaching for that flower. Now, I will come to the word in a second here. This is a very important part of understanding this picture, is what's happening with the flower. He's reaching for the flower, right? What's she doing? Is she offering it to him? Help me out here. Talk to me. She's keeping it away from him, right? She's sort of talking, so he's reaching it, and it's almost like he's teasing it, but it's not quite, right? In fact, what she's doing, because can you tell what kind of flower that is? Some people actually identified it. I'm no botanist, right? No, it's a bit more. It's a particularly Italian version of it. It's a pink rose, right? A rose, yeah. And there botanists out there have identified the exact species of it. But there's two reasons now why this really ties into the meaning in a very tight way. One, medieval theology, and for about 400 years up to this, had been writing about various things in nature and their theological implications, right? So I can look at this and I can say, oh, the properties of that thing in nature remind me of God in this way. Okay? Get the idea? Right? Because all nature is God's creation. Okay? So the Virgin Mary in particular was associated with 10 different flowers. And one of them was the rose. So in this case, he's holding a symbol of herself. Now, why was the rose a symbol of the Virgin Mary? The reason for this is that a rose was a beautiful, soft, fragrant, delicate flower that grew from a spiny, thorny stem. Okay? Just get that better. Now, in Christian theology, the Virgin Mary is sinless, but she came from the lineage of Eve, which was fraught with sin. Mary's the rose. The stalk with the thorns is the sinful legacy of Eve. Okay? Get that? Right? So, here's her symbol, right? The beautiful flower from the thorny stalk. And Jesus, as he's holding on to her finger and reaching for it, she's keeping it away because what's going to happen? If she lets him have it, he's going to poke his finger on one of those thorns. And part of the Virgin's role as his mother is to protect him when he can't protect himself from the temptations of sin. Right? Protect him from the world around him. So that's a really poignant metaphor there, right? She's showing us not only who she is, but she's also showing us what her role is in raising Jesus. Right? She is the one who will make sure that he doesn't prick his finger on a thorn, metaphorically. Right? It's a great thing. At first it's like, it just looks like a flower. Yeah? But no, there's so much more to it than that, right? The star on her shoulder, we see all the time, because her name in Latin is can be seen as a homophone. Sounds like the star of the sea, Stella Mare. And she provides safe haven. So we often see her with a star on her shoulder. Right? So these things are all there because the artist has chosen to put them there. Right? And they all add up to something more. Colors are symbolic as well. We'll have a chance to talk about that too. Right. Okay. Now, the Renaissance. What does the word Renaissance mean? Does anybody know? Yeah. Rebirth, exactly. Renaissance. Okay? When we talk about the Renaissance, when we talk about Italy around 1300, 1400, what is being reborn? Does anybody know? What is the rebirth all about? Ancient Rome, exactly right. So the Italians at this time, it begins with poets, one of whom, Petrarch knew Giotto, saying that, hey, for the last 1,000 years or so, ever since Constantine decided to hijack the empire and take it to Constantinople, right, for the last 1,000 years or so, the Roman Empire has been dead, and culture's been dead. We've been influxed, right? We've been invaded by all these gods, right? The French. You know, the Italians feel like the French. Everybody seems to feel like the French. Except me, I like the French. Okay? The Renaissance is going to rebirth various elements of Roman culture, self-consciously so. Forms of poetry, kinds of art. Right? Now, when we talk about the history of art, Giotto is often seen as the first light of the Renaissance. Right? The father of the Renaissance. Because his works were seen as the first full culmination of this revived interest in ancient Rome. Now, there's nothing particularly Roman about this. It doesn't look like Roman statues. She doesn't look like Venus or anything like that. But what we find when we look at Italian pictures, Italian Renaissance art, that the Renaissance kind of happens in three phases. And the earliest phase of the Renaissance, Giotto's phase of the Renaissance, is an interest in realism. Here's a Roman painting up in the Walters, right? This is an Egyptian portrait mask from after Rome had taken over all of Egypt, after Cleopatra, right? And when people were buried in Egypt, they would, Romans were buried in Egypt, they would have these portrait masks on their mummies. And some of them have survived, and they give us a really good sense of how realistic Roman painting used to be. Not a lot of Roman painting has survived, some wall paintings, but this is nice and local. You can go see it up in Baltimore, right? That sort of chiaroscuro modeling, three-dimensionality, sense of individuality, vibrancy, liveliness, is what separates Giotto's work from what had come 50 years earlier. This is the beginnings of the Renaissance, is this interest in realism. That's our first phase. What we'll see eventually is Renaissance artists will really get interested in copying Roman statues. And you'll start to see Roman bodies appear in Christian stories. And eventually Roman bodies appear in Roman stories. Right? But for now, the Renaissance is kind of isolated solely to this revived interest in realism, in liveliness. Right? Now, it's motivated by more than just an interest in the Renaissance. It's motivated, again, by these things we've been talking about with the mendicant orders and the Franciscans and the Dominicans. But it certainly is one of the things that comes into play when we talk about the Renaissance. Okay, well, yeah. Oh, we'll get, don't worry for that. The first phase is sort of realism. Second phase, we start to see Roman body types in Christian stories. Third phase, we see Roman body types in Roman stories, right? Where we have to get interest in Roman subject matter rather than just Roman forms, okay? And they kind of come about on 100-year intervals, really. Giotto's, this first phase, around 1300, around 1400, you start to see Roman body types appearing in Christian subject matters. And around 1500, you start to see Roman body types appearing in Roman stories. Like the famous birth of Venus, Venus on the half shell, right? It's a Roman story. It's a Roman figure. Okay? Now, Giotto is working primarily in the city of Florence, and this is the epicenter of the Renaissance, up to around 1500. This is where really almost all of it is happening. Not all, but almost all. Right? And as I mentioned before, this was painted for the Franciscans, for this church, the Church of Santa Croce in Florence. So again, we're going to give it a little bit of historical context, right? He's working in Florence, he's working for the Franciscans and for their mother church in the city of Florence, which as you can see is not all that old, right? It's a relatively new structure at the time Giotto paints this. And originally this was part of a big ensemble of pictures that were hinged together, right, and seen as one. And they've since been broken apart. Some of them are lost forever, right? but here you get an idea. Based on the iconography, the subject matter, we can place these things together. Originally, there was the group at the top, various saints, based on the way they're looking. I sort of made this up myself. I mean, the pictures themselves are out there. We all think they went together. This is my guess at the arrangement based on the way they're facing. Right? So ours was the center of the top. And at the bottom, down below, in an area that we call the predella, that's a series of narrative scenes down below. Storytelling. There's the Nativity, the birth of Christ, there's Christ presented in the temple, there's the Last Supper, a crucifixion, etc., etc. Right? That's the predella down below. These all were one group of paintings. It may have been bigger than this. We don't know. But sometime in the 18th or 19th century, it was split up. Somebody bought it or came into possession of it and decided, why sell one picture when I can sell 20? And so they're scattered all over the world, and we're very lucky to have even one of them. Right? That's the top. This is the norm for a lot of works you see in museums. They will have been lifted from another work. Right? Unstapled from the thing next to it. Sometimes you'll find paintings that are painted on the front and the back. Like that. And somebody will go through and very carefully sawn them apart. So you get the front and the back separate that can be then sold to different museums. We've got a beautiful little painting about like this big of St. George that we always thought was next to a painting of the Virgin Mary. That's hung next to it here that's in Madrid. And recently they looked at it and they realized there's a crack right here on this one that aligns with the crack on this one if they were this way. Right? Fascinating. It's like detective work. Right? The way this is in. So we know that this is part of a bigger work that was in falling apart, and this is the norm. Right? So, to recap, what have we learned? We're talking all the time about iconography. Right? Things are included for a reason. And that reason usually gives us a better understanding of symbolism, right? It deepens the meaning. The style that the artist uses is also a choice. In both of these we saw a very typical Giotto style. Those almond-shaped eyes and heavy brows, the teeth and the lips parted as if breathing, a very human-looking Christ, right? These are all style choices that Giotto makes, and they affect the meaning of the piece. And then we've also found that understanding the historical context, whether it's who it was made for or how it was originally seen in the company of what other pictures, makes a difference on how we interpret things. Right? Now, we're not quite done with the 14th century. We've got one more work to talk about on Monday. So that means I'm not going to make the first worksheet due for a while yet. If you want to get started on it, feel free to go ahead. But it's not due yet, so you don't feel like you have to turn it in yet. Okay? What you should be working on this weekend is going out and finding a work at the National Gallery that you want to look at. My friend Bridget, who was here, sat in our class on Thursday, who gave me that horrible cold, or helped to, on the Metro on Saturday. Anyway, she says, and this is very true, you know the old adage, I know what I like? When it comes to art, I know what I like, and I don't like that. The bottom line is, that's not really true. We like what we know. And I would tell you that every term for 12 years at Marymount, when I ask people to register a work of art, I always say, I want to do the Giotto. Because now you like it better because you know something about it, right? So I'm hoping that I don't get 25 people saying I want to do Giotto. There's lots of other things down there that you'll find that once you know more about it, you're going to like it better too. Okay? So have a good weekend. I'll see you on Monday, and I'll give you updates on when I change the due dates on things on campus. Okay? Great. Thank you very much. Oh, you got here after I called your name. Okay, great. Good, because this was your last chance because I had to report today who hasn't shown up at all. You were here the first class, right? So be sure you familiarize yourself with Ken. Go over the syllabus pretty carefully. Right? So, because I went over all that the first day. I don't have time to. All right? And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to come and see me. All right? Good.
I need that.
You need that?
Yeah.
But I need the back.
I want to take it.
Well, more about that.
Yes, please. Thank you.
You can? Okay, very good. I'm gonna turn off the recorder so it doesn't hear us. Does it hear you?